You arrive in a narrow chamber, where the air smells of wax and vellum and the fire whispers like a clerk. The ring on the table is bright, but the ink is brighter. You can taste metal in the back of your throat, iron hidden inside velvet words. Her portrait watches from the wall, the still face that started it all. Smooth paint, careful light, a promise sent over water and politics. They called her Anne of Cleves. They called the match necessary. Then the doors of Tudor England learned a new word, annulment. Footsteps approach, soft, official. A seal warms under a thumb. Somewhere Henry VIII breathes like a furnace that is tired of burning, and somewhere Thomas Cromwell counts favours the way a sailor counts knots just before the storm. You press your palm to the grain of the table and feel how power travels in paper, line by line, clause by clause, the kingdom turning on letters instead of swords. She enters without a crown, in foreign silk cut to English taste, and the room changes temperature. Not beauty like thunder, composure like winter sunlight. She is listening more than speaking, weighing each phrase the way a careful traveller weighs the bridge. You hear the old rumour scratching at the door, portrait flattery, first sight disappointment, a king who preferred music to marriage, and you hear the newer one, quieter, that she will transform insult into income, and danger into distance. A scribe dries a line. A ribbon is tied. The portrait does not blink, but the future does. You lift your breath and set it down slowly, because this is how a queen survives a furnace, by choosing the right paper, the right silk, the right silence. Tonight, you will know why. You stand in England, winter 1539, spring 1540, when the kingdom smells of ink, tallow, damp stone. The break with Rome is fresh enough to sting. The king's conscience has become statute, and statute has become danger. Henry VIII holds the throne like a man who has paid for it twice, once with vows, once with blood. He wants a son alive and a Europe that hesitates before it bites. Fact moves first, slow and official. Francis, Duke de France, and Emperor Charles V might clasp hands again. The sea is not wide enough to comfort you. Thomas Cromwell, the king's iron in black wool, proposes a Protestant shield, a marriage to Anne of Cleves, sister to Duke Wilhelm of Jülich-Cleves-Berg. A painter, Hans Holbein, is sent to catch a face and bring it home without the weather. Portrait as passport, paint as treaty. You hear the quills begin. Contracts net the air, jointure, dowry. Alliances written as though storms obey grammar. Courtiers practice saying, "Your Majesty," with mouths that already count tomorrow's seating plan. You taste the metal at the edges of their words and know fear when it chooses velvet. Rumor slides under the door like smoke. They whisper that Holbein's light was kind, that flesh could not match paint, that the king's first glance landed with a thud. They add music to the tale, how Henry dressed as Robin Hood to surprise his bride and only surprised himself. You hear the laughter, warm and cruel. Then a quieter rumor, colder. That disappointment, once spoken aloud in the royal breath, becomes policy for other men to enforce. You breathe. Paper in, iron out, Cromwell tightens laces you cannot see. The Treaty of Greenwich with Scotland trembles. The northern monasteries remember their roofs too clearly. England needs friends who keep ships ready and letters secret. So the wedding is set for January 6, 1540, Greenwich Palace. The king arrives with ceremony shaped like inevitability. The bride arrives with composure shaped like survival. You watch Anne stand where the air has learned to bow. She speaks through interpreters, through manner, through the steady weather of her eyes. She is not thunder. She is winter light that shows the room as it truly is. On the wall, Holbein's portrait holds its breath and refuses to apologize. The scholars will one day argue over that first meeting, weighing jest against malice, anecdote against agenda. You can hear them already, turning brittle pages while snow strokes the window panes. Some historians insist this part was exaggerated to ruin a reputation, but the private letters from that winter suggest something else. The sentence sits beside the rumor like a patient shadow. It does not smile, for now the crown must look satisfied. For now the court must pretend the treaty is a kiss, but you sense the hinges straining under the mask. A king who breaks with popes can break with painters. A minister who builds ladders can be asked to fall from them. The chapel smells of beeswax and linen. The vows sound correct because vows always sound correct. Your heartbeat finds the slow drum of the organ and hides there. Silk rustles, metal breathes. A ring turns on a finger and decides nothing. Not yet. Outside, the river moves like policy, dark and obedient. Inside, a queen learns the weight of a smile that must not crack. And you, catching the echo of boots in a passage, understand what the city fears. Not swords, amendments, annulments, edicts written after the candles go out. You trace the seams inside the crown and feel where they rubbed skin raw. Every ruler, every marriage, carries a tender place that policy keeps touching. Begin with the king. Henry VIII has buried 2 wives in love's name and law's costume. Catherine of Aragon set aside after long winter pleading. Anne Boleyn ended beneath a French sword in 1536. Jane Seymour gave him a son, Edward 1537, and then a grave. His wound is humiliation disguised as certainty, a body that ages, a conscience he legislated, a loneliness too powerful to confess. He needs alliances that do not mock him, portraits that do not lie, knights that confirm the story he tells himself, still chosen, still virile, still king. Now the bride. Anne of Cleves, raised in the sober courts of the Lower Rhine, taught thrift, piety, and German plainness that prefers warm rooms to warm speeches. She plays tables and reads not Latin, but the faces in front of her, a practical fluency. Her wound is foreignness, stepping into a language that can praise and punish with the same word, into fashions that make silence seem simple-minded and modesty seem dull. She learns quickly that England judges with its eyes first and its ledgers second. Between them moves Thomas Cromwell, whose wound is success. He has climbed so far that gravity itself becomes policy. To weld England to Protestant friends, he needs this marriage, needs the portrait to be accurate, the first meeting to be kind, the bed to be cooperative. January 6, 1540 arrives anyway. Fact places a candle beside the bed and leaves the room. After the wedding, the king reports no consummation, telling intimates that he finds himself not moved. Within months, July 1540, the marriage is annulled on grounds of a precontract and non-consummation. Anne receives houses, lands, income, and a new title, the king's beloved sister. She stays in England. She writes careful letters. She lives. But rumour loves the seam where fact cannot sow. It hisses that the king called her the Flanders mare, that Holbein flattered, that Anne smelled of another country's kitchens, that the king's body failed, and his pride needed a prettier story. Drunk on cruelty, rumour pokes every bruise, boils, impotence, laughter behind doors. You feel how useful a woman's face is when a policy needs a villain gentle enough to forgive. You stand by the hearth and hear the cooler whisper, quieter, steadier. It suggests that Anne understood the room faster than the room understood her, that she read the king's discomfort, chose composure over challenge, let the lawyers build her a bridge made of paper, and crossed it with both hands full. A queen who wins by not winning. From later winters, scholars bend over diaries and diplomatic notes, measuring malice against minutes, and the careful sentence steps into the chamber like a servant with hot wine. Some historians insist this part was exaggerated to ruin a reputation, but the private letters from that winter suggest something else. The words warm the air without deciding it. You breathe the smell of wet wool and ink. You touch the vellum where clerks have pressed today into permanence. The king's wound asks for admiration. The bride's asks for safety. The minister's asks for proof. Between wounds, agreements grow teeth. Anne sits very still in brown gold silk that makes its own small weather. She speaks softly, thanks loudly, and never asks to be loved. You watch a miracle that looks like accounting, the slow conversion of insult into income, of farewell into freedom. The room, not used to this kind of victory, lets her pass. You learn that in courts, the most dangerous love is not between husband and wife. It is the bond that turns a private wish into policy. You can smell it. Incense made from influence, not myrrh, fact steadies your hand. By spring-summer 1540, the king's breath quickens near Catherine Howard, a bright rose in the household of the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk. Smiles become errands. Errands become messages. Norfolk's kin sharpen their manners. In July 1540, the marriage to Anne of Cleves is annulled. Days later, Thomas Cromwell, the minister who sold Europe a painted promise, is attainted and executed. Anne receives Richmond, Hever, Bletchingley, a generous income, and the soft armor of a new address, the king's beloved sister. You watch the forbidden bond ripen, not adultery, but preferment. The king's fresh tenderness for Catherine braided with the Howard ambition to return the old families to the royal ear. Desire wrapped correctly walks into counsel disguised as common sense. The air inside the passages warms. Iron under the floorboards begins to hum. Rumor licks the surface like a match. It says Anne was unlovely, that Holbein flattered, that the king called her a name shaped like a mare, that Cromwell stalled consummation to keep his treaty intact. Another rumor, meaner, insists that Henry's own body stuttered, and pride paid the scribe to fix the tale. The word scratch hungry. You let them pass. You listen for paper. Anne's quiet counterbond forms in rooms that smell of wax and bread. She befriends the Lady Mary, exchanges gifts, praises English music, bows to English saints without arguing theology. She writes thank yous that read like treaties. She does not plead to return to the crown. She agrees to leave it beautifully. When envoys arrive, they find a woman who has already chosen the language of survival. Sister, not rival. Neighbor, not case. The bond between Anne and England itself starts to hold breathe paper in. Iron out. Cromwell senses the new constellation and the cold shade beneath it. He stitches law with trembling hands, while Catherine Howard's laughter moves the temperature of whole corridors. You hear the scholars from a later winter turning the pages you cannot touch, weighing confession against convenience. Some historians insist this part was exaggerated to ruin a reputation, but the private letters from that winter suggest something else. The sentence sits like a small brazier, giving heat without announcing a verdict. Fact returns with the sound of a seal cooling. July 9th, 1540. Convocation declares the annulment on grounds of precontract with the Duke of Lorraine and non-consummation. Anne accepts. The king marries Catherine Howard within weeks. Cromwell's head is shown the light he no longer needs. The policy has chosen its lover. Yet the quiet triumph belongs to the woman everyone expected to lose. In her chambers, silk whispers over vellum while clerks enumerate fields and houses. She tries a phrase aloud, sister, and discovers it tastes like safety. You watch her step away from the furnace without a scorch, leaving only a portrait to absorb the jokes. The bond that mattered was never the bed. It was the arrangement, the careful network of courtesies, signatures, and deliberate silences that allowed a foreign queen to convert danger into distance and distance into income. You touch the table and feel the grain purr with satisfaction. Some victories sound like a counting. You watch how order is staged, silk in front, iron underneath, and incense to blur the seam. The council room is warm with breath and tallow, the table cool as doctrine. Clerks pass vellum like waiters. You learn a new theatre. No drums, only decrees. Fact steadies the scene. In July 1540, convocation and commissioners draft the annulment with the precision of carpenters. Precontract with Lorraine. Non-consummation. Jewels returned. Style altered to the king's beloved sister. A separate instrument reckons manners. Richmond, Bletchingley, Hever, and an income that will teach England to call survival prosperity. The wax smells sweet when it is hot. It smells like policy when it cools. The choreography is careful. A messenger bows once, twice. A seal warms. A hand steadies the ribbon. No one raises a voice. This is how kingdoms change shape without shaking the walls. A cup of spiced wine appears in front of you, and you do not drink. Sweet makes steel harder to taste. Rumor slips in with soft shoes. They say physicians were asked private questions with public consequences, how the king slept, how the queen breathed, whether flesh can fail with dignity. They repeat the mayor word and make it canter through every corridor. They hint that Cromwell coached the king to delay a bed he did not want until the paper could be made to say what the heart already signed. The gossip fits too easily. Easy is what you learn to doubt. You tilt your ear toward the quieter company where accounting speaks. Letters travel to Cleves describing courtesy, not passion. Gifts shuttle between Anne and the Lady Mary. Visits from Henry are staged like polite weather that never overstays. A household grows around the title sister, bright with maids, chaplains, stewards, and English life padded in wool. You feel the air stop bracing itself for thunder. It is a different danger now, boredom used as a blade. Breathe, paper in, iron out. The king marries Catherine Howard within weeks. The court changes perfume, from treaty to music. You hear new laughter overlapping old signatures. Ministers learn to walk with their heads slightly tilted toward Norfolk. Cromwell does not attend the change of season. His head has completed its errand. The queen, who was not to be queen, retains rooms, lands, and freedom to travel. You touch the pane and feel the English rain proofread the window. In a later winter, scholars stoop over dispatches and household books, and their careful sentence arrives like a discreet knock. Some historians insist this part was exaggerated to ruin a reputation, but the private letters from that winter suggest something else. The phrase seats itself between the rumors and refuses to be hurried. It warms the room without pardoning it. Anne practices control the way other women practice dance. She signs thank you as if it were armor. She praises music like a treaty. She meets the king with a calm that never solicits. You see the quiet threat hidden in courtesy. By refusing drama, she denies enemies their stage. A plot cannot thrive where nothing flares. The council breaks. The clerk stacks skins of law. The last seal takes a breath and stiffens. You hear the kingdom settle. There is no cheering, only shoes on stone. The shuffle of a page entering a chest. The click of a lock that will always sound like mercy to those it spares, and like mathematics to those it does not. You lift the cup at last and taste spice over metal. Silk rustles. Iron waits, and you understand how a life can be rescued by good paperwork, delivered at the exact temperature of obedience. The chamber is warm with tallow and agreement, and the world breaks without raising its voice. You stand between silk and iron while quills finish what glances began. The paper smells of honeyed ink. The table feels like doctrine. Outside, the Thames moves like a sentence that has already chosen its verb. Fact lays its palm on your shoulder. On 9th of July, 1540, Convocation declares the annulment, precontract with Lorraine, non-consummation, and the crown returns to the king as if it had only been borrowed. Anne of Cleves accepts the style of the king's beloved sister, with Richmond Bletchingley Hever, and an income that can teach the future to be polite. Before the month ends, 28th of July 1540, Thomas Cromwell is executed, and Henry VIII marries Catherine Howard. The date carries two blades, one for the minister, one for the treaty you breathe. Incense in, iron out, rumor arrives on cushioned feet. It insists the king called her the Flanders mare, that his hands cooled in the bed like stones in a river, that laughter bruised the curtains. It swears Holbein painted kindness and got a country to sign. Then another rumor, colder, corrects the first. That pride required a prettier failure than a body's weariness. That physicians were made into poets. That Cromwell's noose needed a narrative to keep it from looking like politics. You taste both versions and keep neither. You listen for paper. Anne's breath is a level line. She hears the clauses. She measures the room. When courtiers bend, she bends exactly as far and no farther, silk that knows it covers iron. To the king she gives gratitude. To England she gives a new address. To herself she gives a country that will not require her knights. The portrait on the wall does not alter. Portraits never must. Living women do. Across the city, Catherine Howard's laughter rings in passages newly perfumed. Men practice new courtesies with the Norfolk angle to their spines. Pages carry fresh music. Secretaries carry fresh names. Cromwell's head completes its errand. Policy changes hands and pretends to be weather. You feel a draft and turn, only to find the window closed. The cold comes from the arithmetic of power, not the season. You press your palm to the vellum copy, and it pulses like a sleeping heart. This is how knights break here, not with swords but with clauses. From a later winter, the scholars keep their appointment with our doubt, their fingers scarred with paper, their candles making halos in drafts. They bring the one sentence they always bring when a life is pinned between a rumor and a record. Some historians insist this part was exaggerated to ruin a reputation. But the private letters from that winter suggest something else. It settles like a warm stone in the pocket. Comfort. Not cure Anne signs once, twice, and chooses distance instead of thunder. You hear your own voice form a sentence you did not plan, as soft as wax taking a seal. My ending was already signed. It could be hers. It could be Cromwell's. It could be any name that learns how paper writes the body. When you leave the chamber, the corridor smells of wax and rain. A servant carries a ring wrapped in dark cloth. The door clicks gentle as a verdict. And somewhere far from music, a woman who has lost a crown counts keys, not tears, and finds the number good. Morning files the kingdom smooth. The ink is dry. The silk is folded. The iron is put away where children cannot see it. You walk through rooms that now pronounce her the king's beloved sister, and the title fits like a cloak that warms without shining. Fact steadies your pace. In July 1540, she keeps Richmond, Bletchingley, Havre, a steady income and an English household that speaks her name with careful vowels. She learns the corridors, not the throne. The servants' timetables, not the council's storms. Survival here is a schedule. Rumour adjusts its mask and follows. It says the king stared at the river after Catherine Howard fell in 1542, measuring the water for an old answer. It says he thought of Anne of Cleves again, safe, unblaming, economical as winter light. It adds a sweeter sting, that she might have been asked back to the crown, that doors were held open just long enough to fill the court with delicious guesswork. Another murmur, meaner, swears she swelled with secret hope or secret child, then shrinks the tale when confronted with calendars. You taste the salt of such stories and let them pass. Fact returns like a neat ledger. Henry VIII dies 1547. Edward VI inherits a country too thin for warmth. Anne keeps her houses and her quiet. When Mary I comes to London in 1553, Anne rides in the coronation procession, a foreign sister turned English pageantry, silk creaking softly above iron streets. She will die in 1557 and be buried in Westminster Abbey. Stone remembering what gossip cannot hold. In the registers of alms and liveries, her name sits politely. In the mouths of those who deliver fruit and wax, it sits kindly. A life written in receipts is still a life. You study what the record chooses to keep. Inventories list hangings plate, gowns of brown gold and black velvet. Warrants authorize coal against cold and cider against afternoons. The country forgets to hate her because she refuses the posture that invites it. She answers letters. She visits Mary. She prays the way practical people breathe. Measured, private, sufficient. Yet rumour keeps a little fire for long nights. It reprints the mere word on cheap paper. It insists Holbein sold a kingdom a painting. It rehearses bedroom jokes with the eagerness of rooms that never met her. Then, as if aware of its own laziness, scholarship clears its throat from a later winter and offers the single sentence it always brings when mud and minutes collide. Some historians insist this part was exaggerated to ruin a reputation, but the private letters from that winter suggest something else. The line warms the air without absolving anyone. It reminds you that records can be merciful, and also strategic. You breathe the abbey's cool stone in your memory. Candles, dust, the silence that teaches iron to be quiet. No foreign queen rests under English names, and the country keeps her tidy like a useful room. What was lost to laughter is recovered by paper. What was denied by a bed is granted by a will. You touch the edge of a folded document and feel it answer like a sleeping bird. Not every page was opened. Not every clause was read aloud. Some days you can hear the hush of something withheld, like incense that never quite burned. Even now there is a sealed letter they refuse to release. Let the chamber dim until it becomes a room you know, quiet, breathable, yours. The fire is only a glow behind the grate. The wax on the desk shines without burning. The last threads of incense drift like a thought you won't keep. You set down the names Anne, Henry, Cromwell, one by one, the way a clerk closes ledgers at dusk. They do not argue. They rest. Listen for small friendly sounds. The soft click of a lock at peace, the hush of silk folded carefully, the faintest answer from iron settling back into its sheath. History loosens its collar. Paper stops pretending to be thunder. A ring on the table is only metal again, harmless and round. Breathe in, slow, until your ribs widen like doors on easy hinges. Feel the room steady around you. Breathe out. Let the long exhale carry away court dust and candle smoke. If a rumor knocks, let it pass by like rain moving down another street. If a verdict lingers, imagine it written on water. You are not in Greenwich nor in council. You are in a quiet night with a window that opens to clean air. The portrait on the wall, whoever it is, has turned into colors and varnish. You don't owe it anything. Another breath in, a softer breath out. The pulse slows. The mind unlaces. Somewhere far away a scribe caps his ink, and the page says nothing more. On the table, one candle holds a small, steady flame. It lowers, it steadies. It lowers again, and the room becomes a safe hush. The light goes out, gentle as a hand on your shoulder. The night keeps you.